believe whatever you believe. Just don't invalidate another's existence. Just be a decent human being. Whatever you think is whatever you think, to be fair. Hello and welcome to the 50 Shades of Gender podcast. We get curious about all things gender, sex and sexuality, as well as relationships, feminism, the inclusive kind, mental health and kink, and all that makes us humans unique and diverse. From body positivity to body dysmorphia, it's all welcome here. If you like what we do and want to make a contribution, you can become a patron on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/50 Shades of Gender or buy us a coffee. Links are on the website. Now join us on a journey of inclusion, acceptance and respect. I'm your host, Esther Lemons. I am a cis queer woman and my pronouns are she and her. In this second Reflections episode, Katie interviews me as I reflect on further conversations I've had with gender diverse folks, what I've learned about gender as well as my own journey and how I and the podcast have evolved almost a year since the podcast started. We reached 10,000 downloads last week and have no intention of stopping at 50 episodes. We also talk about expectations, finding the essence of each conversation, the subtleties of language, intuition and setting intentions, awareness and facets of identity, assigned titles, smart business decisions, the discomfort of learning, and discovering ourselves as we go. A few minutes in, I mention my therapist and being unsure if it's okay to say what I said. I have checked with them and it's a-okay. Consent is everything. It was recorded on the 18th of June 2021. Now let's get into the episode. Katie, over to you.
Thank you. This is like the hot seat being turned over to me. As someone who's known Esther for nearly 8 or 9 years now, we're both control freaks. So handing the control over to me is probably very, very nervous for her. And
I didn't
she
say
knows
control. I just said hand over.
But this is an opportunity to see where you've got to in and after another 24 episodes, because this is always the 25th of each batch, and to see whether things have become clearer about gender in your mind, and sex and sexuality and relationships and the different aspects that we bring to the table around that. Because as the podcast host, the people you're interviewing are not there to teach you, although you end up getting taught in that respect, because what you're doing is you're putting it out there for hundreds of people to listen to each episode, and you're of course listening live yourself. So I want to see, you as the one listener who's listened to every single episode without fail because you were there.
Yeah, and several times over because of the editing and stuff. Yeah, so I get to know each episode quite intimately. Yeah,
exactly. So see what your growth curve has been on this, and hopefully by the end of this episode, ask you what you think your growth curve will be over the next 25 episodes. And okay, so in fact, the first question I'm going to ask you, which I haven't prepared you for, in fact, is
great.
Here's the left field question straight up. Compared to episode 25 and episode 50, where we're at now, where you are now after listening to another 6 months worth of these interviews, is that where you expected to be 6 months ago?
That's a good one. I'm not really sure I had any expectations. That was kind of the good thing about this journey, or is the good thing about one of the good things about this journey is that I don't really know where I'm going. And I just know what the next step is. And that's really good for me as someone who's, like you say, a bit of a control freak and kind of needs to have everything figured out before I even start anything. It's just been really good for me to just start. I started with a handful of recordings, and then I started with putting out one episode. Once I took that step, I then, the momentum built and I kept doing it. And I've missed 1 week in the whole year, So... So that's been really good. No, I got overwhelmed because that was at the end of having 10 episodes in a row of what am I going to do next week? Oh my goodness, I don't know, So that was really stressful. So that's when I kind of thought I have to just reframe this or rethink this. And that was actually before episode 25, to be fair. So I kind of figured out a better system for that. And it's been working ever since. So I keep planning between 1 and 5 weeks ahead generally. So sometimes I run a bit low on episodes and that's a bit oh my goodness. But
then I get the message, Katie, go find me some people. And you've got some amazing friends and you've got some
Yeah.
amazing friends who have introduced you to other people, and sometimes you get a podcast guest, and like we both did an actual radio interview recently, didn't we, where it
Hmm.
was like called Pride Anthems, and
Hmm.
I went, somebody else went on the radio and then recommended me, then I went on the radio and recommended you, then you went
That's
on the
right.
radio and recommended one of your other guests.
Oh yeah,
And
Kit. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
perhaps here's an idea for the
Hmm.
next 25 episodes,
Hmm.
as an extra thing for you to think about. At the end of each episode, ask each guest, could they recommend another gender variant guest for you?
Oh yeah, that's an idea.
And get
Yeah.
them to kind of feed in
Oh, yeah,
suggested to you.
just put me in touch. Yeah,
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 yeah.
totally.
But
Because I've
I
had
think,
friends like put me in touch with people. Like my therapist for one has put me in touch with several people. I don't know if I'm supposed to say this, but if not, then I'll take it out.
what, that
Um,
you're in therapy?
no, I'm quite open about being in therapy, but like, no, yeah, she's introduced me to lots of great people, and some have been on my podcast. So yeah,
I mean, actually, it'd be
yeah,
an interesting, very practical question, I think, for people to understand. When you took this project on now, because
hmm,
it's not just 50 episodes; it's essentially a year now,
yeah,
and it's been your lockdown
amazing.
project,
It has, yeah,
and it's taken a long evolution from our discussion about doing this as a book, probably
yeah,
6 to 8 years ago, for it to then
yeah.
to turn into a podcast with possibly the book following the podcast rather than the other way around.
Mm,
And
yeah, yeah. And
what
the
I
book is
think
still very much to be like a local project. That's what I still envision for it. Whereas the
Yeah, because that
podcast,
was
it can
our
be anyone
original
from
vision.
anywhere.
Yeah,
Yeah,
our original vision
yeah,
was to, and that hence the, and 6 to 8 years ago was when things like the 50 Shades book and film were out there, and the
mm,
idea was for us was just to say, what would it look like if we were to find 50 people where we live who all do gender differently,
yeah,
particularly and initially in just the trans community, and it's expanded beyond that now to non-binary and intersex and people
yeah,
related to those people. But
yeah,
the idea was to show that there are no two trans people the same, that there is as much diversity within a small group, a small city, to
totally.
show that gender is as variable as the human race is. And I think that was
Mm,
the original idea. And then the
yeah,
podcast has actually given you greater opportunity because you've had books from where? Different countries all over the world? I don't know.
yeah. Well, the UK, America, Canada, Australia, um,
Denmark, yeah. Have we done Denmark yet? Oh, no,
Denmark.
Denmark's
Yeah,
in the pipeline.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, we've had Alf on the
Yeah,
podcast.
that's true.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're from Denmark. Yeah.
You've had an
Um,
alien as well, haven't you? Does that count as extraterrestrial?
That should count as extraterrestrial. Yeah. That was Jareth, episode 35. This is good. Yeah. Yeah. That was a great conversation. Yeah. They're
No,
all amazing, really. Yeah. Wow.
one very practical question I just want to drop in as
Mm.
well is, did you realize how much work this would be, for one? And two, do you want to tell listeners how much work this is? And this isn't like a case, this isn't a sympathy call. This is simply because I've recognized that I've been very happy to give you 99.9% of the work on this. Um, because it is a lot of work, and what comes out as a 1 hour episode is not 1 hour of work. Do you want to give
Not
people a
at
little bit
all.
of insight into, how much time it takes to produce a 1 hour episode?
Well, I like to joke and say this is like the worst paid job I've ever had, but it's definitely the most fulfilling. So yeah, I would say it's like a part-time job, like 2 days a week that I spend on the pod because I do everything from planning it in, planning conversations, doing the recording, doing the editing, putting the episode together, writing the show notes, uploading, making the episode pages for the website, making the video for YouTube, and then social media posting. Yeah. And that and I've definitely learned that for each hour of audio that takes about 2 to 6 hours of editing. It varies, but
Wow.
there's a lot of it's that takes a long time. Yeah, and I feel like I tune into each episode and feel like I want to get the gold out of each conversation. And that takes some thinking as well. Like that's in writing the show notes and recording the intro and outro for the episode. Or not so much of the outro, because that's just saying, find us on the website. So yeah, the finding those pieces that really reflect what the episode is about. Yeah, and the editing are probably the most intense work, I'd say. But it is such a rewarding thing to do, and I don't find it a chore. Like jobs, you can think, oh god, I just can't be bothered. But this is like, even if I'm having an off day, It's like, oh yeah, I'm doing this thing today. And like Wednesday's podcast day, I make the episode on Wednesdays normally. On Tuesdays, I do the first audio edit. On Mondays, perhaps I have a listen through the episode first to get a feel for what I'm working with, so I know how much work I'm going to have to do on Tuesday. And some days the schedule goes out the window, and I have to do it all on Wednesday, and that's a bit intense. So ideally,
And
I
then you line
get
up a
started
couple more
earlier.
recordings ready for the
Yeah,
subsequent
yeah.
week.
So I've got a good few in the pipeline actually, and so obviously yesterday we hit 10,000 downloads, and that's like just amazing. I can't even. It's just like my brain can't even.
Where
And
were we at?
yeah,
Where were we at episode 25? 5,000 or less? Three
I
to four
think that
thousand.
was less. I think that was
So it's
less. I could
definitely
probably look it up,
growing
but
a little
yeah,
bit exponentially. There's a little curve.
it
So
it
will
does
we
it
be
does that.
beyond?
Yeah,
In 25 episodes time, we will be beyond 15,000. Then it will have grown by then, much more.
hopefully,
Perhaps it'll be
yeah,
20,000. Let's see if we can double it in
maybe,
6 months.
yeah,
So
yeah,
just going back to the editing question then, because obviously
yeah.
if you're doing video, if you're making films, a lot ends up on what's called the editing floor. When I had a documentary made about me 8 years ago, it was 9 hours of filming over a week turned into
Yeah.
a 25-minute documentary. Now, obviously, with a
Yeah, it's not
podcast,
quite like that.
it's not like
Yeah.
that. You're not
No.
losing 90% of the material just
No,
to
no, no,
find.
not at all.
It's much
And
more
I
of
only
natural conversation,
yeah.
isn't it?
Yes, and I only edit out like long pauses, or when people say a lot, I take a load of them out. Not all of them, because like it's a conversation, it's not an interrogation, or like an interview. So people naturally say and naturally pause and stuff. So it's not a matter of like making it perfect, which has been really good practice for me as well as a
Yes, because
recovering
you're a perfectionist as well as a
perfectionist.
control freak. Yeah.
Yes, yes, totally. So yeah, I just mainly take out the pauses, the ums, and sometimes maybe if there's any repeats or there's technical issues and you end up with several recordings, and sometimes you have hindsight thoughts and then you
Mm.
record that and I have to put it in. It's kind of like a puzzle sometimes, which is interesting.
Do
But usually
interviewees ever come back to you
yeah,
and say, "Hey, could we cut that bit or something like
yes,
that?" Do they ever
that does
say,
happen.
"Oh, I
Yeah,
said that, but I'm actually thinking I'm not comfortable
yeah,
with that being out in the atmosphere somewhere,"
totally.
or
That does
"I
happen.
mentioned an
Not a lot, thankfully.
ex-girlfriend's name and I need to remove that name" or something?
Yeah. Yeah, it does happen sometimes, not very often, thankfully, because that is obviously more work to do, but that's totally fair. And I know I
But
have
that option
people,
is there for future
that option is
guests to
there.
know
Oh,
that
totally. Yeah, yeah.
they have a degree of control over
Yeah,
what goes
yeah.
out after the fact as well. You're not
And
using
I
that
do have
audio.
them, yeah, and I do have them sign like a consent form. So they're okay with, they know what to expect. And I've actually just expanded upon it because it used to say, oh, the episode will be edited. But like there's editing and there's editing, right? Because in a way you can piece it together so that you make something completely different of it, which is
Yeah,
obviously what a
no,
lot of
absolutely.
what
Yeah.
happens a lot in tabloid newspapers.
Oh, not
Your
just
words get
tabloid.
twisted.
I
Like
was
regular
interviewed by the
newspapers, just
BBC
media.
about
Yeah,
yeah. I was
yeah,
interviewed about the
totally.
BBC about Brexit. They came around and filmed me for like 90 minutes, and then the 1 20-second clip they put out made it look like I supported Brexit, which, as you know, I don't.
See, that's what
So
I
yeah.
mean.
So in
Yeah,
other
they
words, you're
just
not
twist
editing
and
to
turn
take out
it.
of context. You're just
No,
editing
no,
to
no, no.
clean up
Just to
things like
tidy
that.
it up. And I have to work around sometimes audio quality because, technical issues and
Mm.
stuff like that. So I usually end up like when I have an hour long conversation, I usually end up with about 50 minutes, 52 minutes. That's kind of the proportion of, like what gets taken out. But it does vary. Sometimes a bit more, sometimes a bit less. Yeah.
And you spoke about people signing a consent form, but to
Mm.
put this into context to say sex and
Yeah.
relationships,
Yeah.
consent isn't a one-time thing; it's a continual thing. So they're signing
Yeah.
consent before it is
Yeah.
also kind of ongoing consent after it. So if they have those reactions after having done the podcast, they can come back and say, "Hey, can you
Yeah.
cut that
Well,
bit?"
what I've said is like, yeah, just as soon after, ideally. And some people say, can I just listen to it before it goes out, which is fine. So I send them the audio. But I do also say, like, once it's out there, it's out there. So only say stuff you're happy to be in the public domain, basically, like
People
be
should
out in,
learn that when they're teenagers on social media, that when you
right?
say stuff, it's out there
I know,
forever.
right?
I know they've got these new
uh,
things like, self-deleting tweets and self-deleting message services and all these kind of things. But I think you have to be aware that what you say is going to be part of the internet's history going forward.
that's right. I am so glad that I did most of my stupid shit before the internet came along. Most of my stupid shit, I still have a little bit to go, so I'm sure there will be more stupid shit. But anyway, yeah. So
No, yes, there's more stupid
that
shit
side.
yet to experience, but yeah,
Oh yeah,
but the podcast
yeah.
isn't one of them. But speaking of your own, learning curve,
Mm,
what I'm going to ask this in a slightly different way. What have you unlearnt in the second half of these podcasts as opposed to the first
mm,
25, or even across the whole 50? What, going into this project, what did you think you knew about trans, non-binary, intersex, and other labels describing gender variance? What did you think you know that perhaps now you think you don't know so much, or you know differently? So talking about what I would call unlearning things rather
mm.
than just learning more about the
Yeah.
subject.
Well, for one, I think I was very not rigid necessarily, but I'm really structured. That's how my brain works. So I was like, I've got all these categories, and it's kind of weird because like people need to fit in these categories because these are the ones I've got
Hmm.
on the website. And I not need to fit in them, but I was a bit like, oh yeah, there's categories, and I thought I had a good idea of what they were, but they've kept expanding with new terms and labels that I come across, which is great. And what I've learned especially is to really listen to people's language because it can
Mm.
be really subtle. And one big one is some people use the language or are okay with the language I identify as, because that's what I used to
Hmm.
ask people. How do you identify and what does that mean to you? And I've had a few people say, actually, I don't use the language of I identify as, I am. For example, CN Lester said, I am a trans person. I don't identify as a trans person. Evie said, I'm a woman. Same with Rachel Lawson. She was like, I'm a woman. I don't identify as one. I am one. Other people were more okay and used the language of I identify as, and they're completely fine with that. So that was one subtle difference.
Where does that leave you thinking then? When someone, how do you react when, because
Mm,
I imagine this is how people in the ally world react when a trans person or non binary person explains to them, I would like you to treat me this way. This is how I use pronouns. That ally
mm,
then takes that on board and then
mm.
perhaps goes on to use that for the next trans or non binary person they meet. And then that person then says, oh, no, but I don't use language like that. I use language like this, and then the allies confuse and go, which is it? So
Yeah, so
when
actually, I
people
find that the
switch,
language, yeah, so the language of like pronouns and how to address someone, it's as personal as a name. You don't learn someone's name and then go and call everyone else by that name because that's not
yeah,
their name. This is one person's name and it's their pronouns and it's their way of being, they tell you how they want you to interact with them. And that is a very personal thing. So it's good to not make assumptions and just ask around and stuff. Because one another thing that I've learned is I've had conversations with many trans people and many non-binary people, and none of them experience being trans or being non-binary in the same way. It means something different to everyone, or they at least experience it all in their own way.
yeah,
So just because I know the definition of being non-binary, which is like falling outside of the binary, it's kind of saying what it's not, but what it is something very unique to each person.
which is a
So,
brilliant, actually, that's a brilliant way of putting it anyway, of saying, I can say what it isn't, but I can't
mm,
tell you what it is, which reminds me of gender outlaw Kate Bornstein,
mm,
when they came round from their op from male to female, they literally said, well, I can tell you I am no longer a man, but what I am, I can't tell you. And
mm,
my own gender journey, is, I would say, has gone from male to female to non-binary to human. I probably started
mm,
human as well, but it's just that the language
yeah,
of identity evolves. And as I say, if you were to
mm,
get, I remember when Stonewall did their engagement with 50 trans people in order to become an LGBT organization, which obviously, as
mm,
we know, for anyone following social media these days, is a big, massive debate in the UK,
mm,
particularly as to how and what that means, and how people within communities can fall out with each other. But that's what I'm saying. You get 50 trans people in the room, and they would rarely have agreed. Yet Stonewall managed to get them to agree, and about
mm,
5-6 years ago. If you were to get all 50 interviewees, or 48
mm.
right now, into a room together, they wouldn't agree with each other. You know, they
No,
might
but that
even
would be
fight over
so lovely,
language.
though.
Hey,
Yeah,
should
but
we
I
do
would
that on the
really love
100th
that.
episode? Let's invite for the 100th
Let's have a
episode.
party,
Let's
said
have
the
a party.
introvert. That's not something I would normally say, but in this instance, I will make an exception.
Yeah, you heard it here first on the podcast, and Esther is now going to say out loud she will not edit this bit.
I
No.
say nothing.
You reserve the
I
right to
promise
edit that.
nothing. I
Yeah,
promise
no where's more
nothing.
consent.
Yeah.
But it would be interesting for the people
Hmm.
to meet each other, because you're meeting them one
Mm.
on one. But if
Yeah.
they meet together, as you say, they
Hmm.
would have different attitudes, different definitions, different
Hmm.
tolerance levels for how they regard the language that is used by themselves or of them.
Hmm.
And they might even be offended by each other. Who knows?
You know what? That is probably true, and because language is such a tricky thing, and like if you use language to describe your experience, like if two people are having a discussion or a conversation, and I talk about my experience and they talk about their experience,
Mm,
then you can kind of use any language you want because you're talking about your own experience.
mm,
But when you start generalizing and saying this is set in stone and this is like this, that's when you get arguments. And it's like some of the arguments are just irrelevant, like the bathroom argument. They are arguing about something hypothetical that, might or might not happen. And they're missing the point, of like, let's not even go into it. Listen to Helen Belcher's episode, I would say, for that one, because that was really, really good. And she had a lot of good stuff to say about that.
I haven't caught up with that one yet. I will have to.
Yes, you
I'm still
do.
playing catch up.
It's really good.
I think I've only listened to 42 episodes. I feel bad.
Only
Um,
42.
yeah, you should have like one of those
Seriously slacking.
active listener badges, for or a little loyalty card. We get a free cup of coffee once we've listened to all 50.
That's fair. Yeah. I'd buy them a cup of coffee, whereas at the moment I've got like the Patreon and the buy me a
Yeah, that's
coffee
two
thing
ways
set up.
people.
So
I mean,
people,
because we mentioned
mm,
that how much practical work goes into this, and obviously
yeah.
two ways people can support you is via the Patreon, and I saw you got another one this week.
Yeah, I
Um,
got one today actually. Yay. Welcome,
but
patron.
and you got the alternative support platform is like buy me a cup of
Buy me
coffee,
a
isn't it? Or
coffee.
something. But
Just
you
buy
don't
me a
like
coffee.
coffee.
Yeah.
You don't
No,
like
that's true.
coffee.
So you can also set it to tea
Okay,
or
fine.
books or yeah, you can set whatever people buy you. Yeah.
Yeah, that was nice. That
So
was sweet, wasn't it? Someone thanked you with a book voucher as well recently. So
that's right. Yeah, that was
that
really
was cool.
lovely.
Your first
Yay.
group episode.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
but
like
yeah,
this week's episode or last week's episode, should I say, with Kit for higher education. Yeah, that was great. Yeah.
but so because you're getting noticed now, and people are going to say, "Oh, 50 Shades of Gender could be a good place to platform inclusion in higher education." Because
Mm.
so what comes with your 10,000 downloads? How do you handle fame?
Not.
No, but what platform? I mean, this is just to reiterate, I guess, your mission statement. What
Mhm.
platform are you seeking to provide through this podcast? And as that
Mm.
platform gets bigger and a larger audience, what
Mhm.
do you hope it will achieve?
Well, the main thing is, and I think that's the most challenging thing, is to maintain like a sense of integrity.
Mm.
That matches me, like in my vision and my ideas for this project. I do want to just keep providing like just a safe space to share and keep it positive in a way, because I know like a lot of people who are on a gender journey other than cis, they don't have an easy ride, and it must be really tricky to stay positive and be positive. And I know it's not easy. There's different lanes, I think, for activism in a way. I feel like
Mm.
this is kind of a form of activism for me. And I want to provide something that is a learning experience, and it provides hope. And like, I don't like the term normalizing this,
Hmm.
because it is normal, but what we do need to do is normalize talking about it.
And humanize it, I guess.
Yeah, totally, totally. And it's just a people like this is part of people's experience, and this is part of people's identity, and it is normal. It is just a part of life. And like one of the things I've heard some people say, my gender is the least interesting part about me. Just ask
Mm.
me something different. There's loads more to me than just my gender journey.
Yeah, and there's
And
many
it's
people
it'd
you've
be
interviewed who don't identify with
yeah.
the word gender.
Totally, yeah. There's an episode coming up with a trans man called Dean who said that they just wish gender didn't exist altogether. But they also realize it's important for people. You know, yeah, it's such,
I
wow,
mean,
it's such
that's
a
one of the
minefield.
areas, isn't it? As well, gender is described as a construct, as
Mm,
opposed to a biological reality by some, and
mm,
also gender by Judith Butler, who is a famous lesbian feminist academic who, in the last few years, also came out as non-binary,
mm-hmm,
continued to use the term lesbian of her relationship or their relationship as well. So
mm-hmm,
language evolves, and
mm-hmm.
fights persist and stay out there. And one of my hopes for this podcast has always been that it would humanize the debates, because the debates aren't about academic facts about sex and gender and things like that. The debates are about real people's
Totally.
lives, and you're giving a
Yeah,
window to the world on what it's like to actually be trans, and hopefully developing empathy like that. Have you had like what I would call emotional revelation moments in the podcasts, or by the person you're interviewing?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. By me mostly. I don't know about
Oh,
the other
see, yeah,
person,
yeah.
because they know their journey, and they're
Yeah,
just kind of sharing, what is kind of normal for them. But for me, I'm like, what? Wow.
yeah.
All the time. It's amazing. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if
I
you had
learn
a
so
if you
much.
had a wow jar rather than a swear jar, I think that when we did our reflections on episode 25, I was counting how many times you swore on the episode. You haven't sworn once yet, but perhaps this time round we
Oh,
should
I
have a
have.
wow jar and like okay, but you
Yeah.
don't
Well,
have
the
to
swear
prove
jar
it.
would still be fuller than the wow jar, but
Oh, right.
probably not for other people to hear, but like in private. But
Maybe you
yeah,
go, oh
I
wow,
like the
by
idea of a
saying, oh
wow
fuck.
jar.
Yeah.
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 Right.
Oh fuck,
Yeah.
that's a wow moment, but using the
Yeah.
expression. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
because I remember talking recently, actually, to a female professor of equalities law, amongst other things, and she was saying when she engages in the discussion about gender construct, gender wars with people who are gender critical, etc.,
Hmm.
she puts a human face on the discussion and says, would you make the same argument about the bathroom, about X, about Y, about changing rooms or whatever, to
Mm.
my niece, to her face, and my niece is trans.
Mm.
If you put a
Totally. When
human
you
face on
put
it.
a human there, and it changes everything, and that's why the Human Library is such a great project, for one.
Yeah.
And also, I feel like that's what I'm kind of doing with the podcast, because people have a lot of assumptions about what things mean, what words mean, what labels mean, what they think people are like. But once you meet a person and just have a conversation with a person, that changes everything. And I saw that happen when you organised the respectful conversation about gender a couple of years
Mm,
ago at a local arts centre, Norwich Arts Centre, and it was a heated discussion with the people on the stage and the people in, the gender critical people in the audience, and it was a heated debate. But I remember afterwards in the bar, there was one of the gender critical people having like a conversation with a trans person. And that was like, I didn't stick around to listen because it was their conversation.
mm.
But that was so much more human, just a one to one conversation. And the gender critical person saying, "Oh, I'm not transphobic." And the trans person saying, "Okay." And then they just had a chat, and it was a bit like, oh, yeah. So that was really insightful. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was a very interesting occasion, to say the least. And I think
Hmm.
at least two people who were on the stage at that event have been interviewees now, if not three. No, three.
That's
You've
right.
had yeah,
Hang
yeah.
on.
You've had Sarah, Charlie, me. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
3.
Cool.
Yeah, that's right.
That's
Yeah.
fantastic. Just had to cross off the others on that list in terms of as allies. The others were allies, and I
Mhm.
think the three of us were lived experience of alternative gender in
Mm.
that respect. But yeah, there are multiple views about gender, and they continue to fill the airwaves. So hopefully, what you're continuing to do is giving people these kind of insights into the variety, because people talk about, people who are critical of gender talk about gender ideology. Do you think there's a gender ideology after 50 interviews? Is there a course in how to be a trans activist? Is there one monolithic way of having this philosophy around gender, or has 50 episodes shown you there are 50 gender ideologies, not one? I don't know,
There's
how would you put
probably
it?
about 7 billion and a bit, to be fair. Um, Yeah. See, to be honest, I don't even know how to answer that. I'm a bit like, just believe whatever you believe. Just don't invalidate another's existence. Just be a decent human being. Whatever you think is whatever you think, to be fair. Yeah. But what you were just saying actually made me think of allyship, which we had
Mm.
a conversation about as well, episode 19.
Oh,
Um,
I forgot that, on episode
yeah.
25, every time I tested you on what episode number something was, you got it right. I'm not going to even say if I give you a
No,
random number.
after episode 26, I'm a bit lost. I know the odd one,
Okay.
and then I'm like, sometimes I'm lost, which is really I'm a bit disappointed, really, because I was
What?
thinking I'm going to remember every single episode name and number and
Okay.
everything. I'm like, no,
What was
didn't
episode
happen.
42? Do you remember? No, 42. No.
No,
Meaning.
it
No. Good.
escapes me.
Yeah.
No,
Meaning of life. But we'll move on then.
yeah,
Next time I'll give you a
yeah.
chance to prep.
No, that's fair. Yeah. So being an
Revise your
ally,
episode numbers. Yeah. Allyship. There.
yeah,
Yeah. Back to
yeah.
allyship.
Yeah, so talking about allyship, like being an ally that's one thing that the panel about allyship taught me, and it was
Mm,
Tiger Rose who said it's not up to me to say, oh, I'm an ally. It's up
mm,
to the people you're trying to be an ally for to tell you if you're doing a good job of it, you
mm.
know. And that's a really fair thing. So I then changed part of the about me bit on the website rather than saying I'm a gender diverse ally to say I aim to be the best gender diverse ally I can be, and I'm always learning. So it's not a destination. It's not something you claim for yourself, but you kind of have it assigned to you by the people you want to be an
Yeah.
ally for. And I'm really careful to say that, even though several people have said to me, "You're a great ally," and I'm like, "Brilliant, thank you." I'm still not going to go broadcasting that I'm an ally. So I feel like that's the subtleties of that language and stuff I've learnt about as well.
So
Because
going.
you can get enthusiastic, and I think a lot of people who want to be good allies just get enthusiastic and they just want to do the right thing. But you also have to be willing to be wrong and get told that you've got it wrong sometimes, and say, okay, I will change. Change behavior accordingly if needed. So yeah.
Actually, that's a good point. Actually, in terms of like what's the temptation when you? I was going to say when you get it wrong live on air, but you don't get it wrong live on air because you have the option to edit. So, what do
I
you go
do, and it's
through if you get
tempting.
something? I
Yeah.
know.
It is tempting to sometimes think, "Oh my god, what did I say? I'm gonna have to take that out." But normally I have that reaction. I've had that reaction in several episodes. For one, when I talked to Bonnie, when I talked to Devi, just some of the stuff I said. And recently there's an episode with an intersex person that I've recorded, which is coming up. And I was like, "Oh my god, what have I said? What have I said?" But usually I kind of just tend to leave it in because I freak out initially and think, oh no. And then I calm down. And then usually it takes a while for me to record and then listen to it. So there's a bit of space in between. And then when I listen again, it's sometimes like, oh no, that wasn't so bad. That's okay.
Mm.
And then sometimes I freak out a bit and I message you saying, I've just said this thing. Is this okay? Can I say this? Oh my God. So it is, yeah, it can be like that. But
But
it's
you know
like,
what? I think it's really healthy for
mm,
you to leave that in because
yeah.
I mean, as you said, I think you said a few moments ago about trans people, non-binary people, intersex people. They live their understanding of gender and sex day in, day
Hmm.
out. It's 24/7 for them.
Yeah.
For the potential ally, for the person just discovering it for the first time, who's not even an ally yet, just discovering that human being, they're
Mm,
discovering it in the moment. So of
yeah.
course they're not going to get the language right straight away. Of course they're not going to get
Mhm.
pronouns persistently right for that person immediately
Yeah.
and continually. So
Mhm.
it's inevitable they're going to make mistakes. So perhaps one of the things we need to do, and this might help the world and not just through the podcast, etc. The idea that we need to model making mistakes well,
Yeah.
learning in the moment, and being not afraid to be wrong.
Mhm.
I think there's a
Yeah.
big
That
fear
is a
around
thing.
language,
I
particularly
was
around
too. I was
trans.
Yes, exactly. And I was in a place where I would rather say nothing than say the wrong
Yeah.
thing. And that because that's safe, isn't it?
But
Because
that
then you
also
don't get
makes a trans
criticized.
person feel blanked. And
Totally.
you're saying
Totally. And
nothing
then I
makes me
realized
feel like you're ignoring me, which then feels like another kind of insult.
totally, totally. So
Mm,
it's been a process for me to really step into that space of, okay, I'm willing to be wrong. I'm willing to get it wrong and to be corrected for it, and hopefully kindly. Yeah, that's all I can hope for, really, that someone is kind about it. and people have been so far.
Mm.
Actually, they have really
Good.
have been. So yeah,
Yeah, it's one of the
yeah,
things I try and teach other trans people to be a little gentler on the people trying to get it right,
mm,
and to give them a few get out of jail free cards. I call it giving people a soft pass. It's not a
mm.
hard pass, meaning like you can say anything to me, but it's a soft pass. It's a learning experience. You're getting to know me. You're getting to know the language. I accept that you're going to
And
trip up
yeah,
from
and
time to time.
actually, totally. And it's the same thing. I think when you talk to a trans person or a non-binary person or whatever label they use, and you get stuff wrong, and some will be like, okay, and others will be offended,
Mm.
and that's fair too, and it's hardly ever really personal, I think, but they've just had enough of it and they have to deal with that shit all the time. So you just get a bit tired of it sometimes, and that is, you know I think the least we can do is not be put off by it. It's like, oh, I tried using this language and then I got knocked down for it, and it's like, well, tough shit, get up and try again, you know yeah.
And I guess that's also the good thing about the podcast. It's a good thing about things like the Human Library or anyone putting on something like the Respectful Conversation. Not everybody who is trans wants to talk about being trans, and how do you learn about being trans? Yeah, I mean, I've heard people like there's the book about why I'm no longer talking to white people about race, and I've heard many
Mm.
trans people say I'm not going to educate you. Go educate yourself. Now, obviously, they
Totally,
could
it's not their job.
they could jump onto a search engine and type in what does it mean to be trans? What does trans mean? This, that, the other, and they'll get the
Mm.
collective wisdom of the internet, which we know isn't always entirely right.
Mm.
But they could also obviously jump on the podcast and they'll listen to one episode. And if they listen to only one episode, they might come away thinking, "Oh, so that's what being trans is." But as you've experienced, that they'd have to listen to dozens,
Well,
not
it
one.
kind of depends, because that's why I've got the categories on the website. So you can search by a particular gender label. If you want to listen to only episodes for trans women, then you
Mm-hmm.
can search for those, and it will give you a list. There's a table on the website. Same non-binary people. If you just want to listen to non-binary people's episodes because that's what you want to learn more about, because of your own reasons. You might have
Mm.
someone in your life who just came out to you as non-binary, so you want to understand them more, or you might be questioning your own gender and thinking, I wonder if I'm non-binary. So yeah, just listen to those. So yeah, so it is. I like to make it easier for people to find stuff as well, like if they want to listen to it by category or by gender label. So
We could
yeah.
play with that actually a little bit on YouTube because we could create some playlists by the label.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. That is good. Yeah, because there's only one playlist at the moment, so we can
Yeah,
categorize them. Yeah,
yeah.
that's a
So
good
it's
plan.
just different ways of
Yeah,
sorting
side
because
note. Yeah,
that's what we do in life, isn't it? We sort people as we encounter them.
totally. Yeah.
We see them and we stick a label on them, and then we sort them as safe, not safe, want to know, don't want to know,
Mm.
scary, not scary, weird, not weird, normal, not normal. Our brains do that. That's where all this language of unconscious bias comes from that we hear about so much that people either believe in or disbelieve in. But
Mm.
that's the sorting hat of life, the social sat nav we use to
Totally.
encounter people. But I've listened to a few episodes where it's not that you got it wrong, but you've asked someone right at the beginning, and can I ask you, this is so and so, and can I ask you what your name is, where you're from, and how do you identify, or what
Yeah.
labels do you use? And then some
Yeah.
people have come back with, I don't use labels, or I don't use the
Yeah.
language identify as, and
Yeah.
then that's not getting it wrong, but it's them saying that's not my preferred way of description. How do you handle that? Does it
Yeah.
make you think, oh my God, I must change the intro for the next episode? And then the next
You
person
know
comes
what?
along and
Both.
says, I do
Both.
use identify as, and then, oh, I've got to
See,
change
that
it back
that's
again.
that's exactly it. Because actually, one of the things I've noticed that sometimes I feel like I'm saying the wrong thing,
Hmm.
but then an interesting part of the conversation unfolds. And you're like, oh, so that's good. So if I hadn't asked it that way, we wouldn't be talking about this right now, which is really good.
Yeah.
And and also, for example, when I recorded CN Lester's episode, we had a chat before we started recording, and I did tell them, like, this is how I usually start, and I ask, how do you identify, and they said, I don't use that language. I say I am, and I said, actually, can we add this in the episode, because it would be good to get that point across. So we kind of put it in intentionally as well. And I've since been playing with different ways of asking people about their gender. So sometimes I say, how do you identify? And I've also said, tell me about your gender experience. So it does vary now. And I feel like I don't need it to be set in stone. Like I always ask this particular question when we start. So that's been a bit of an evolution as well, which has been really
Mm.
interesting. Yeah.
One of the things I do like about I think, I don't know what episode number you introduced it at, but
Uh-huh.
has been in the second half of this season so far. Very much you've been doing what I would call outtakes as well, outtakes at the end, and also what I
Yeah.
would call a teasy trailer snippet at the beginning before you go
Yeah,
into
not
the kind of the
always, but
official
sometimes.
intro. And
Yeah.
I really like that. It's like, oh, you just
Yeah.
drop me, because it's like you're a fly on the wall in the middle of the conversation. Then you have to come out of it,
Yeah.
go through the official intro, and then rediscover that bit in the conversation
Yeah,
later.
exactly.
And it
Exactly.
really is like a teaser trailer. I like those.
It is, and it's really good. And I don't always do it, but it is something I want to do more of. But again, it takes extra time, which I don't always
Yeah,
have to put in. But especially when something particularly stands out, like sometimes it's loads of stuff, sometimes it's just one little snippet. But the outtakes I find really fun, and I've been adding them actually since episode 25, our first reflections one,
right.
because just we were, prattling around a lot. So I thought I'd put it at the end. And I thought, yeah, this is fun. Let's do that. Let's do some more of it. But it all depends on what I've got recorded. Sometimes
Mm.
there's a lot and sometimes there's not really anything, which is, it's just what it is. Yeah. But I do like
To me,
them.
yeah, and
Yeah.
I like the fact that the less context there is around them, the more curious one is, because you
Mm,
haven't got the full episode context until you go in. So you're literally, it's
totally.
like walking up and there's two people having a conversation. You walk up behind them and you hear them saying, so and so did this and blah blah blah, and this happened, and they met in a cowshed, and you think, well, where'd that come from? And it's
Mm.
when you get these snippets out of
It's so
context,
random.
it
Yeah.
sparks your curiosity. We get that
It
in the human
does.
library when we do what we call floating librarians. We drop into a reading room where a reading's taking place. We go in for
Mm.
3 or 4 minutes, check everything's okay and safe and happy, and we've dropped in the middle of the conversation, and then we have to leave again. And we've no idea how that
Yeah.
conversation is going to turn out or how it started. We've just got this 3 minute snippet or something
Snippet.
like that.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think those snippets and clips are fabulous ways to
Mm.
trigger the curiosity in our space. And the thing is, that's also a weird thing as well, because a lot of people who are gender variant do not want to be seen as different, do not
Mm.
want to be
Yeah.
seen as variant, as to use the language of 19th century freaks, weirdos, or what I like to call queerdos. The idea that you're different is not, you actually want to disappear into real life and just get on with life,
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
opposed to,
Totally. And as you say, a lot of people just want to live their lives. Not everyone wants to talk about being trans or non binary or whatever other label they might be using. A lot of people just want to get on with it and be left alone, especially when they go to the fucking
yeah.
toilet in public. Right. So, yeah.
Obviously, coming on the podcast, that they're signing their life away a little bit to come on the podcast, and their anonymity is disappearing a little bit. Although I think you have
No,
had
there
some
have
people,
been some
you've had some
semi-anonymous
anonymous. Yeah,
episodes where I've
that's what I
just
thought.
used someone's first name, and they have been kind enough to supply me with a picture. Everyone so far has given me picture,
But there may
and
come a
even
day when
people who are
somebody
not
comes on
out.
as a silhouette. Who knows?
I don't know. It might happen because
Or an
I wouldn't want
avatar.
anyone to. Yeah, I wouldn't want anyone to. I would love for people to share their stories, but obviously they have to be comfortable with the way they share it. So
Hmm.
yeah.
Do you ever, as you're about to ask a question, think, "Oh, am I going too personal with this?" Or I wonder if
Oh,
this person.
all the time.
Oh,
I
really?
not second guess, but I feel really, really conscious of what I say and my language. But I'm also, I think this has been a really good journey for developing my intuition because I feel like rather than have a set list of questions for everyone, which I don't have, it's just a conversation and I kind of just feel into it and I ask what comes into my head, or I talk about things that come into my head. And it's kind of something you feel your way through because some people you get the vibe of them and they're quite happy to talk really openly about things like surgery, and
Hmm.
other people are not. So just, I don't go there, not consciously, but it's just the way the conversation flows.
Yeah.
So,
So
yeah.
you intuit whether this person might like to
Mm.
open up about their surgery and this person doesn't
Yeah,
want to go there, kind
and
of thing.
sometimes I ask something like, and I say, it's okay if you don't want to talk about this, feel free to say so. But then I just ask the question.
Mm.
So and most people have said, that's fine. Yeah, I can talk about
Mm.
that.
When
So
you
yeah,
ask a question, are you asking because you want to know it or because you think listeners want to know it?
I think it's probably a mixture because I feel like I set my intention for the episode when I start it.
Mm.
And it's to be like, usually it's to be informative, for it to be, I don't know, enlightening, eye opening, all these things. I kind of set my intention. So it is, I think, a mixture of all that. It's like a mixing pot of that. Yeah.
Mm. As because I mean, to me, any kind of conversation is a kind of therapy. I describe people as my medicine, but also
Mm,
engagement and conversation as always revealing both.
mm,
And what I mean by that is, like, traditional therapy used to be the therapist who would ask questions and never reveal anything of themselves. And that's not the kind of therapy I like, because I want to get to know my therapist, that kind of thing. What I'm
oh, yeah.
asking, I guess, is what has doing all these interviews of other people, two questions really, I guess. What have you revealed of yourself within the podcast, would you say?
Mm.
And I'll give you a little 30 seconds to think about that one. And secondly, what has changed within you by doing it? So, what has
So,
changed, and
so
what have you,
much.
and what do you
Mm,
think you have revealed of yourself? Because, you know, you do sometimes open up and express something about yourself in the podcast. You don't just ask
mm,
these questions
mm.
and be a blank slate. People are getting to know you in the podcast, not as
Yeah,
much
I've
as
been
your
opening up
interviewees, but a bit
more.
of you. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been
And I
opening
know you're
up
a private
more and
person and
more.
an introvert,
Yeah, I
so that
am.
must be
I am.
difficult as well.
So yeah, it is uncomfortable, but I have had the nudge to share more, because sometimes you hear conversations like in other podcasts, and then I think, like, the host is talking so much, I'm like, let the other person talk, for goodness sake. So I do get
That would
that
be the one that
reaction
I would be doing,
sometimes.
Yeah.
No comment. So but, like, for me,
Meow.
I think I do tend to, it's easy for me to hide behind this, I'm just
Yeah.
there asking the questions. And
Mm,
it's like, no, actually, a conversation is a two-way street. So yeah, I feel like I have been opening up more and more about who I am, and I've been discovering more and more about who I am.
mm.
So it's been kind of a real life thing, like increased awareness and then increased sharing of that awareness. Yeah, so that's been a really lovely
So
flow as
if I
well.
was to ask you, what are your labels, Esther Lemons,
Mm,
and how do you identify? And has that changed from a year ago, perhaps?
totally. Yeah. So the label cis queer is one I quite like, because I do feel like the word queer. I like the word queer. That resonates with me. I also think I'm cis. I know I'm not trans. I'm definitely not trans. I think I'm cis. I don't know what it actually means to me to be a woman. I feel like
Hmm.
that's all a bit up in the air.
Mm.
I feel like that's something I'm I don't know, looking more into, I suppose, because it's become all blurry. Like, I've learned a lot more about gender and identity, so I know more. And
Mm.
also I know how much I don't know. So everything's blurry. So it's both clearer and blurrier. So that's a thing. Yeah, other labels, pansexual, which is the one you introduced me to many years ago.
Wait,
Yeah.
no, I was
What?
going to say you didn't have much choice after kind of having
That's right.
had kind of relationships and interactions and attractions to guys and girls and then Katie's. So there's, it definitely had
There's
to,
more than one
definitely.
of you.
I, I know several Katies, but there is only one actual Katie, of
There's
course.
only
Yeah.
one of you, really. Yeah, no, totally. And I like the term pansexual. I feel like it fits me. It feels the most inclusive to me. Again, that's a personal thing. So yeah, and then the polyamorous label is the most recent one, and one that I've been reluctantly embracing. And that's been a journey as well, because I feel like using the language of, like, one of my partners, that's like a recent thing for me, and I'm getting used to that, and I overthink things a lot. So I was like, oh my god, how do I navigate this? And, like, you both have been more okay with it than I have, almost, and you've been like, yeah, okay, whatever, fine. And I'm like, oh my god, what do I do? How do I say this? Do I not say this? How do I navigate? What do I do here? What about this situation? What do I do then? Oh my goodness, it's real, it's like a real minefield. So yeah,
And in
that's been a
fact,
bit of a
people's
journey.
perception of polyamory is that the additional partners would have a bigger problem with sharing the other person than the
Hmm.
person doing the sharing having a problem with how do I navigate the other two.
Totally. And there's so many misconceptions about it. And
Yeah.
the thing is, it can look so many different ways. And The most common form, or rather what people assume is the most common form, is the FFM, or female female male triads. And
Mm,
that's something that gets the most airspace, I suppose. But that's just one small
yeah.
facet of like what a polyamorous or like a non-monogamous relationship can look like. So I feel like I'm very much, this is a newer part of my journey. I'm still figuring it out. I get it wrong all the time, like things I do, things I say or not say. So yeah, I'm very much figuring it out. But it comes with that increased sense of awareness. Yeah, so it's really healthy, I think, for me. And it's definitely benefited my self-development because it's made me a lot more aware of like my own baggage around relationships and the conditioning that I've received when I was growing up, and like unpacking all that, thank fuck for
Mm.
therapy. So yeah, so that's all been like going together, like the podcast and my personal journey and the therapy and all that stuff. So it's been really like, wow.
It's interesting because when we started this, or when we thought about starting it, and then took half a decade to actually start it, which was then where you jumped in and did the huge lion's share of all the work to actually make it kickstart and go somewhere. We were toying with, is it 50 Shades of Trans or 50 Shades of Gender?
50 Shades
And
of Trans was our initial idea, and then
yeah,
one
and then
of
we switched to
one of
50
our
Shades of
friends
Gender.
said, "Call it 50 Shades of Gender," and yeah, she was right. So yeah,
And
yeah,
but it's and where it's evolved already, it's not just 50 Shades of Gender. It's 50 Shades of Gender, 50 Shades of Sex, 50 Shades of Sexuality, 50 Shades of Romance or relationship structures. And we realize that, I think, and certainly it's my perception as I listen to the episodes, that obviously you're not talking to someone just about their gender experience,
yeah,
identity,
yeah,
or journey, but gender is itself, we live intersectional lives, and gender is itself, it intersects with sexuality, with relationships, and you're discovering there are
totally.
shades to relationships and shades to bodily sex in terms of intersex, and
Yeah,
shades
those
to
are all
sexuality.
facets of
Yeah,
identity, like
because how
gender,
do you do
sex,
how
relationships.
yeah
Yeah,
how do you
hmm
do sexuality labels if the person's gender label is already wibbly wobbly?
totally
And I mean
right.
wibbly
Yeah,
wobbly in that kind of what I don't know, in the non-binary quantum
fluid,
wavy fluid sense. Yeah, I can't think of the right word. Wibbly
kind of
wobbly is my
fluid.
new word. I'm going to be gender wibbly wobbly now. It's a new label.
Do I have to add
But
another category? Oh my
yeah,
goodness.
go back and edit episode 16 and add gender wibbly wobbly. But what I mean by that, though, is, if two gender wibbly wobbly people met, would that be a same-sex relationship? And if one gender wibbly wobbly person went out with a cisgender, really content with their gender person, is that
Mm,
heterosexual or a queer relationship? Because the idea of hetero was meaning different, and the idea of
yeah.
homo means same as. But I don't think if any two people you've interviewed from the last year went out with each other, I don't think we've had any actual partners yet, have we?
No,
Two halves of a
no.
couple, and that's also assuming everyone's couples. There might be thruples, but
Yeah.
what I mean by that is, if any two of your guests went out with each other, I don't think you could describe any of those relationships as fully hetero. Well, in fact, all of them would be hetero because they'd all be different, is what I mean. But actually, they're all queer as well because
It's
they're
all
all,
queer in my book, so that's just what I would call it. But
yeah,
I'm very
and
conscious of also using language for myself, but not necessarally for other
yeah,
people because that's not up
and
to me.
obviously we understand that
Yeah,
queer, for some people who are my age and older, certainly perhaps older, I'm mid 50s, but there are people in their later 50s and 60s for whom queer was a term of abuse and
yeah,
often ended in physical assault when you were queer
hmm
bashed.
yeah,
And so for them it's still a triggering word, and so there are going to be people who
mm-hmm.
disagree with the use of language.
Totally.
and
Yeah,
and
that's
and
fair.
I think you've had that discussed in episodes about intersex and the use of the word hermaphrodite and things.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. And the thing is, I use the word queer. I use it for me. I wouldn't use it for someone else unless I knew that they were okay with that. And if someone has a problem with me using the word queer, that's fine. And
Mm.
they can be offended. That's fine. But if they want to tell me to not use it, that's not okay because I will use, whatever language I want. So, and so should everyone else, as long as they're doing it respectfully about their own experience, and when they talk about other people, also using it respectfully for their experience. So yeah, yeah,
And I think one of the things I've learned, and I think you've probably learned, and it's coming out increasingly in your language when you're asking people, and I can pick that up from you, is that when when you ask someone, how do they identify, or what language do they use, and they say, "Oh, I use this language," and your first thought is, "Oh, one, I've never heard of that before," or two, "Oh, I know what that
Mm,
word means." But instead
yeah.
of that initial reaction going, "Oh, I can put you in that box now. You're definitely demi boy. I know what demi boy means, or I know what grey sexual means. I'm going to put you in that box." And everything that in my head I think I know about that, I've now ascribed to you. Instead, you're
Yeah,
actually
I
kind of
don't.
asking
Yeah,
them,
no, I
what
don't do
what
that.
do
Yeah,
you mean by that term, and what does it mean
exactly.
for you? In other words, you're
Yeah,
individualizing the definition, which I think is
totally.
one of
And
the things we
it's
have to learn. Yeah.
because the people, like, for example, the label demi boy, I've had a one or two or three people maybe have now used the
Oh
label,
wow.
and they are such different people. So obviously the experience of that would be different for all of them. One of them is in an upcoming episode. An intersex person uses the label demi boy and bigender. So, and then there was Jareth Nebula, who was in episode 35, who also uses the label demi boy. And he's also the alien and a gender flux, and yeah, all the lovely things. So yeah, it's all so different. Everyone's got their own experience of even the more subtle, more specific labels, almost, because they're like, a lot of those are under the non-binary umbrella, but they're very, like, very specific. And even Jay, in a recent episode, like, maverick is a term I've come
Hmm.
across as well, and they explained what it means to them, and it was a bit like, well, hang on a minute, I have to get my head around this. I'm not
Yeah.
sure I'm getting it.
So,
So yeah.
how do you think these people are using labels for themselves as opposed to being labeled by society, and also in conjunction with the fact that I hear it a lot in my kind of outside of trans and queer and LGBT circles, in what you might call in the kind of the part of the world that is considered anti woke, to use the terminology. Those people are saying it's all just made up language. Non-binary isn't a thing.
Well,
All
all
these
language is
labels.
made up language.
There
Okay,
you go.
next.
Classic Esther is the TLDR response.
I like to simplify things. I don't know.
You
Yeah.
do, yeah. But okay, so
Yeah,
simplifying things, and yeah, I think I like to, yeah. You're simply Esther, and I'm complicated, because
that's
I tend
right.
to overcomplicate things. But you said something about 10 minutes ago, which I just want to circle back to a little bit. That
Hmm.
you use queer of yourself, cis queer,
Hmm.
and you use cis because you know you're not trans, but you're
Yeah.
not entirely certain that cis is a perfect fit
No, I'm
either,
not
because
actually. No.
your understanding of the word woman for you has evolved, and you're not sure
Mm.
how you relate to that term.
No, I'm not even sure how attached I am to that, to be fair. To be honest, what makes me a woman is no different than what makes me a human being. Because to me, every woman also has a different experience and definition of womanhood. That's different for everyone. And Evie's had some really interesting stuff to say about that, actually, in Evie's episode. Yeah, so for some women, like, being a mother is an important part of their womanhood. For me, it is not. For some people say, oh, I'm a woman because I have these body parts.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you had different ones, or if you had, I don't know, if you didn't have them, would you not be a woman anymore? Ooh,
Mm.
gray area. What
Hmm.
do you say then? So it's so complex. It is so complex. So yeah, I feel like I'm questioning the cisness of
Hmm.
myself, I guess. Not in a way of like, oh my god, my identity has been undermined and all the foundations of my identity are in shambles. I don't mean it that way. I'm not disturbed about it in any way. I'm just curious. I'm like, oh, what is going on here? So yeah, so there is apparently a term, but there's like a label for between cis and trans, which is meta gender. So that's a relatively new term, I believe. So it's an interesting one. I don't know yet. So yeah, it is.
So you have a loose attachment to the word woman, and you're still kind
Yeah,
of feeling
I-
it,
I'm easy
modifying it.
about it. It's
Yeah.
like I wouldn't get offended if someone called me a woman, because it's like it's
Mm.
kind of my experience, and that's how I've been socialized and how I grew up, and it's fine. It's absolutely fine. And I guess I would say that I'm a woman. But I am thinking, like, what does that really mean? And the fun stuff about questioning things like this is a lot of people maybe think, oh my god, if I question my gender, I'm just going to be converted. I'm just going to be converted, and they're really scared of like what they'll find. And it's like, okay, the thing is, when you start questioning all this stuff, you start digging into like all the foundations of like what society is built on, and there's like a lot of toxic masculinity and misogyny. And like once you start digging into all that, that's when it gets really interesting. And I've heard of people who are like, okay, so am I cis? Am I cisgender? Okay, what does that mean? And there have been people who've asked themselves, like, okay, am I a woman? Yeah. How do you know? I just know. I just know.
Mm.
Like Cara said it in a recent episode. How do you know you're a woman? I just know. And it's the same for people who are not. They just know. And if it's good enough for you, it's good enough for them. So don't ask them to justify it or explain themselves or defend it in, like with research or something, because that's just a dickish thing to do. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
hopefully it's okay to ask this,
Go
which is a
for it.
good way to always prefix a question and then
Ask
still
me
ask it
anything.
anyway.
AMA. Yeah.
Yeah. So without revealing your PIN number, what's on your bank card, your latest bank card?
I love it. Yeah, that's another note I made. So when I started thinking about all this stuff, I thought titles. What's been bothering me for a while is like, for men it's Mr. and for women it's like Ms. or Miss or the Mrs. and all that stuff. And I thought, this is bullshit. This is like, what does my marital status have to do with anyone if I want to go and buy a pair of socks? So it's whatever else what I want to buy. And I thought, ugh. So I started thinking about it, and I came to the conclusion of I'd heard of the title Mux and Mix, which is one that I've
Mhm.
heard you use, and I talked about it with Harris in Harris's recent episode. They talked about it as well, and they use it. And I thought, oh, well, that's like a gender neutral one. And at first I was a bit like, am I allowed to use this? I'm not like non-binary or anything. Can I use the mix? And I'm like being cis and stuff. I was a bit like, can I do that? And then I think it was you who said it's like politically non-binary. Politically non-binary. It's kind of
Yeah,
a
because there
way
used
to
to be a term called
use that
political
term.
lesbian. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I thought that's an interesting one. So I thought, you know what? Ideally, I want no title. I don't
Mm.
want it. I don't need it. I don't want it, basically. Just no. And then I thought, if that is not an option, which in a lot of like places it isn't, because you have to have one apparently, then I'll go with MX, with mix. So I started changing some details with my banks first and foremost, and yeah, they were all like, "Oh, you need a title." I'm like, "All right, then make it MX, make it mix." And yeah, some have been really good, and others have been. It's been a bit of an uphill battle, really, and that's just me changing a title. It's not even a name change or anything like that. So even something as simple as that. But I think the more people think about this and do this, the more normal it will become, and the more
Yeah.
people will, and companies and organizations will have to put measures in place for that to be easier to change or easier to, adapt. And I think that I found the easiest thing to do is when I found online forms, for example, where title is rather than a drop down, it's just a field you can choose to fill in or leave blank. That is the easiest thing to do because I don't need to be called
So less
like Miss
this
or
box is
Mrs.
required boxes.
Exactly. And then especially sometimes there's all the Miss and Mrs. and the whatever and doctor and all that stuff. And that's it. And to be honest, I think companies would do well to keep this in mind because it does put people off, from a business perspective, really, not to mention like, just a decent human being perspective, being
Mm.
being being considerate of what people's, struggles are and stuff and what it means to people, how important this is to people. It can put you off buying stuff. So if I come to a
100%.
website now and I see, oh, sign up to our newsletter, or like, oh, you want to buy this product? Sign up here and you can get, or, create an account and you can get another 10% off. Brilliant. Great. So if they then come up with stuff like gender male or female or like title, there's no other options. That puts me off
Yeah.
and they will lose custom.
Business.
They will
Yeah.
lose business. I
Yeah,
think if people
I
make more of an
totally get
effort
that.
there.
And I still
They
find it
will.
frustrating every year. It's like, let clothes be clothes, let toys be toys, and that kind of thing. And I find it frustrating. I have a rather large collection of Dr. Martens boots, as everyone knows, and Dr. Martens boots are the most gender neutral boots I think out there, because anyone can wear them, and the men's and the
Hmm.
women's boots are identical, and yet they somehow on their website still have men's and women's ranges. And it's like, what? Which? How do I tell which boot is girlier and more
You need to
masculine?
have a
And what's the
word.
difference? Oh, I
You need
have,
to have a
and
word.
yeah. If you're listening, Dr. Martins, um, but
Yeah.
I don't think. And then annually, at Christmas they do gifts for him and gifts for her, and I'm
Oh,
thinking, well, what
please
about
stop
gifts?
that.
Can't we just
Gifts for
lump them all
them.
together and go
Gifts
gifts
for
for them?
everyone.
Exactly. And
Gifts
I
for
was
just
logging.
gifts. Yeah, just let
Just
gifts be
no,
gifts.
just gift them to me.
That's right.
It was rather nice. A couple of years ago, a friend did actually buy me a pair of Pride Dr. Martens as a gift and had them
Nice.
shipped. I think it was from Germany because they'd already run out in the UK. So it was amazing, beautiful,
Wow.
lovely. Thank you for
Yeah.
that. But I was in a restaurant only last week with someone
Hmm.
and needed to log into the Wi-Fi. And here's an irony of two different ways of seeing things. So I logged in to use the Wi-Fi, and it gave you choice: log in via Facebook or log in via email. So I just thought, oh, log in via email, because I can't remember my Facebook password. I just stay logged in. So I plugged in my email, and then it said, what is your gender, male or female? And I'm thinking, I want to use the
Ah,
Wi-Fi. I want to use the Wi-Fi. It's not a toilet door.
what the fuck?
It's not a changing room. I just want to use the Wi-Fi. And I sat there for like 90 seconds, infuriated with the fact that I cannot use your Wi-Fi unless I reveal my gender. It doesn't affect my Wi-Fi
That is
usage.
just. Yeah.
And the way I work, because of my own anxieties, is I see that presentation of these two doors, these two boxes, and I literally
Mm.
almost gave up and almost didn't
See,
use the
that's the thing.
service.
And for me, I feel like because I'm more aware of that stuff now, that bothers me as well. It puts
Yeah,
me off as well. And that's just trying to be a good ally.
yeah. And
That's not even
my
that's even
friend
being
was sat.
cis
Yeah, my
ish.
friend though logged in using Facebook, not email, and because she used the Facebook option, it gave her, what is your gender, and it gave her 50 options.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Because of the Facebook optional statuses. Because if you use the Facebook login thing, it uses the Facebook kind of diversity monitoring boxes. So these two different options, email versus Facebook, gave either two genders or 50 genders. And actually, as you said earlier
Well,
on, there's how many
still, it's
genders.
kind of irrelevant when you want to use the fucking
The whole point
Wi-Fi.
is it's irrelevant, not how you count them or how you label them. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly
you can
that.
give it 200 options. Like, I don't care. I just want to just check my emails. I don't need this right now. Yeah,
Yeah. So which
totally.
brings us back to kind of, almost why are we doing 50 Shades of Gender? Because it shouldn't be relevant. And yet
Mm.
you're,
Until it
do you,
isn't,
yeah,
we'll do it. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, that is true. Yeah,
So you want to
yeah.
kind of, so one aim is to actually make yourself irrelevant eventually.
Hmm. Yep, yep,
Not a very good business startup idea. I want to make myself, instead of ubiquitous, I want to make myself irrelevant by
yep.
actually doing my job and finishing my
I'm gonna
job.
make myself unnecessary. Make this work unnecessary. That's the aim, really. That is the aim. Yeah.
So I
Mm.
want to kind of, wrap this up a little bit so we can save stuff for this episode 75.
Totally.
But one of the things you often ask sometimes at the end of your episodes is, is there something that we haven't discussed that you'd like to discuss, or what question
Mm.
would you like me to have asked you? So, what's something? Is there anywhere you wanted to go in this little reflection that we haven't picked up on?
Mm. I don't know about a question. I think I had one earlier, but then it left my brain, so I don't know. But what I did think of, which I would like to finish on, is yeah, I guess it follows on nicely, which is the kind of world I want to live in, really, which is
Mm.
a world where the only response to coming out, whether you're gay or bi or pan or trans or non-binary or woo-woo, or coming out of the spiritual closet, whatever
Wibbly
closet you're
wobbly.
coming out of,
Yeah.
yeah, wibbly wobbly closet, is the only response to that. The only good response to that should be congratulations on discovering more of who you are and living your truth. Let's celebrate this, you know, and that should be the only response to that. That's what I would like to see.
Actually, I'll tell a little
Amen.
story about you about that. Actually, if that's the case,
Okay.
because that's one of the things I like about you is your snarky attitude. No, no, it's no. What I mean, when one of my cats gave birth and I put pictures online, and lots of people said, "Oh my god, amazing kittens! Let me know how to get one." And then somebody else went and said, "How dare you have kittens?" sort of thing. And you
Yeah.
typed on Facebook, "I think you spelt congratulations wrong."
Yeah. See, that's good. I like to be in that kind of space because it's very easy to just want to tell people to go fuck off. It's
Yeah,
just it's an easy go to, and sometimes it's just the thing to do, which is fair. But ideally, I don't want to respond that way, and I want to respond in a way that is, I don't know, not argumentative and things and whatever. But yeah, so I think this person said you should spay your cats, and I was like, I think you spelled congratulations wrong. It's kind of like a way to say fuck off with your opinion, because this is not the place for it and this is not the time for it. But saying it in a way that is saying it in a better way, I
yeah.
guess.
But I think it's a lovely when someone, as you say, when someone comes out to you about whatever, to say congratulations on being more of yourself. It is so
Yeah.
hard in this world to be yourself, and yet we're
Mm-hmm.
continually putting more options out there to be varieties, to be
Mm.
labels, to be whatever. And I think that's the thing, that when people who are outside of the gender variant, genderqueer world look on, they see us as creating new language, coming up with new labels, and often they say, why can't you just be human? And actually we are. And
Yeah.
it's that the way we're choosing to express ourselves rather than
Mm.
necessarily simply define ourselves, it
Mm.
is us coming out as ourself. So I said earlier that I've gone from male to female to non-binary to human. So perhaps actually what I've just done is I've come out as Katie, and I don't mean
Mm.
Katie the woman or Katie the trans woman or Katie the non-binary person. I just mean Katie is me. Katie is the container,
Mm.
and however many labels that are attached to Katie now or in the future or even in the past, I have come out as myself, and that is the easiest thing to be at the end of the day. People can look back at my episode 16, and there's a line when my psychiatrist said, "I knew you were trans before you came out," and I said, "Why?" He said, "Because you were trying too hard to be someone else. You were trying
Mm.
too hard to be male." And so many of us try too hard to fit in, to be normal, to
Totally.
or even to conform to being
Mm.
trans in a stereotypical way. And I think
That
what's been
too. Yeah.
liberating about 50 Shades is showing that there are 7 billion ways to be human, and there's only one way to be you, and only you know it, and everyone else just congratulate you for
See,
finding it.
that is totally true. And even as a cis-ish person, cis question mark person, we're all discovering who we are all the time.
Mm,
And we're all like becoming more aware of things, and we're finding our way in the world, and we're all discovering ourselves as we go, and all these facets of ourselves. And that's something that we should just celebrate, you know.
yeah.
And it's a journey for everyone, and for some people a different gender experience is a big part of that journey, or even not so big a part of
Mm.
that journey. But in the end, we're all just trying to, what's the quote, we're all just walking each other home, right? That's a lovely quote. Yeah, that's it. Mhm.
No, I think that's brilliant,
Yeah.
because I mean, yeah, the podcasts are all about people's personal discovery journeys, and the podcast gives you uh, you know you're a fly on the wall on you discovering their discovery journey.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
it's
And
rather
I've
beautiful like that.
discovered a lot about myself within this, you
Hmm.
know, learning about other people. And I think it's sometimes good. These stories are just really useful because it makes people think there are different ways of being. And
Hmm.
it doesn't have to be according to these strict rules of society. Because for a lot of people, they don't fit. And that should be accepted as well. Because just because your unique you-ness is different from the bog standard, like what's the word even? Like cis het normativity,
Hmm.
monogamy, all that stuff. It's fine for some people and not for others, and they shouldn't be made to feel like there's something wrong with them.
Yeah,
It should just let people be who they are. Yeah. Yep. And let people tell you who they are and take their word for it. That's a good one.
brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, that's
Cool.
a wrap.
Yay. You can find out more details on the website at 50shadesofgender.com/reflections-2, where you can also read the transcript. Thank you for listening to the 50 Shades of Gender podcast. You can find us online at 50shadesofgender.com, on social media, and on YouTube. Again, if you'd like to support us, please consider becoming a patron on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/50 Shades of Gender or buy us a coffee. Links are on the website. We hope you will listen again. Until then, stay curious and open-minded. Thanks, buddy.
Wibbly wobbly bunny. That's my new label.
Wibbly wobbly. Yeah, yeah. That was very insightful. I hope I've covered everything on my notes, because I have so many notes, and I think in the end they just became a blur.
It's still recording, you're going to have to edit this bit.
Yeah. No, that's fine. Yeah, totally. Ooh,
But obviously, by coming on the podcast, I know that's a swear, Joe. I have to say something. I have to have another wow moment to compensate.
Yeah.